Welcome to Racing Hard, a podcast presented by the National Centre for Sports Cardiology. My name is Alex Clements, and today on the show we've got a very special guest, former world record holder for the marathon, Derek Clayton. Dr. André Gerche, he would have heard across some previous episodes of myself. Sit down with Derek to talk about his early days of racing, how he got to be in a place to break the world record, and at a time when running was not an established sport. And then André goes through how his cardiology's evolved, how his heart's changed throughout his career. Before we get into the show, please note that the views expressed in this podcast are designed to be general in nature and should not be used to substitute for personal medical assessment. If you do have any symptoms or concerns, please consult your doctor. Welcome to the National Centre for Sports Cardiology podcast. I'm here with André Gerche from the Baker Institute and a very special guest today, André. I might let you introduce him. Well, so I think you need to build the hype.
Yeah. Okay. So our special guest today would be one of my absolute sporting heroes, Derek Clayton, who set the world record for the marathon in 1969 and held it for 12 years until another Australian, Rob de Castella, broke the marathon world record. And in some ways, at least for a while, some of the marathon greats were part of the Australian sporting vernacular, the Rob de Castella and Steve Moneghetti, but they were preceded by probably in every respect the greatest marathon runner of all time, because in 1969 did what would be seen today as the sub 2 hour equivalent, which was to run under 2:10 at the time, and it was more than a decade before anyone again got close to that. So it's an absolute pleasure to. And I suppose the other part of that now is that at the age of 77, Derek Clayton is still the absolute picture of health and fitness, and very much a product of what a lifetime of exercise can do for quality of life. So welcome. Well,
thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here, actually. And when I think back all those years ago, I'm just glad that I'm still here to be able to talk about it. It seems that long ago.
Derek, can you set the scene a little bit? What your life was like in 1967, what the running world was like, what you were up to?
Well, it's a lot different from what it is now. Very, very much different. I mean, I was a kid, with a dream. I always loved sports. I wanted to be good at a particular sport. I was mad keen on soccer back in my early days, living in England and Ireland, but I wasn't good enough. Didn't make the grade, and so I thought, what am I going to do? So I thought, well, I was always not a bad runner, training for soccer, but I didn't think I wasn't sure if I had any ability or not. So I decided I'll go down. A friend of mine said, why don't you come down to the local running club? So I went down to a local running club and I saw the coach there, and he said, have you ever ran? I said, not really, I only trained for soccer. He said, have you ever run a mile? I said, no, never ran a mile race. If that's what you mean. He said, okay, I'd like you to warm up, and I want you to run 4 laps around this track, which is 1 mile, and see how you do. So I said, okay. So off I went, ran 4 laps and finished. And he said, gee whiz, that was 4:56, you broke 5 minutes for the mile. And I didn't know that meant a great deal. He said, you've got talent. Well, once I heard that, I thought, okay, when do I join the running club? And that's how it all started. So it started from there, but and then I came to Australia in 1963. I'd just been running for a year and a half, did fairly well in such a short time, and I joined a local club here. I didn't know anybody in Australia, in Melbourne, so it was my way of, meeting some new friends, and so I joined a local club here. And after about 9 months, the coach said, look, we're all going to go and run a marathon. I said, a marathon? I can't run a marathon. I said, no, you're not going to run a marathon. You're going to start in the marathon, but you'll run 10 miles. There'll be about 12 of us, and then you can pull out after 10 miles. And I said, okay, that sounds all right. I'm not sure if I'd ever ran 10 miles before, to be honest. Anyway, off we went, and I ran the 10 miles. We got to 10 miles, and this coach was there, and his car, he had a van actually, and a few of the guys decided to stop and jump in the van and said, Derek, come on. I said, no, I think I'll go a little bit further. Anyway, I got to 15 miles and then I got to 20 miles and I thought, I'm going to finish this because I never ever want to run another marathon again, ever. So I finished and I ran just over, I think I ran 3 hours and 3 seconds, and I was bitterly disappointed because I wanted to break 3 hours and I didn't do it. But maybe as well I didn't, because if I had broken 3 hours, I definitely would never run another marathon. And after finishing that, I thought, I'm going to run a marathon and break 3 hours. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
These things do happen. So I had dreams of being a good 1,500 metre runner, 5,000, 10,000. That's what I really, I was aiming for. And but it might have been a year or 2 years later, there was a marathon at Preston, the Australian Championships. I said, I think I'll enter that, see if I can break 3 hours. And I did a bit of training for it. I'm not sure, may have run a couple of 20 milers and things. So I ran this race and won the darn thing in a new Australian record. Well, I couldn't believe it. I really couldn't believe it. And that's how it all started.
What was the record at that time?
2 hours and 22 minutes. Yeah.
So you just knocked a cheeky 40 minutes off your time.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
In 2 years.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, but I had been doing a lot more training because the first marathon I'd been on the boat for 4 weeks, on the ship, and I hadn't really done that much. I certainly hadn't trained for a marathon. But I think it showed a little bit of mental stupidity that I think you need to run a hard marathon. And so then I was still concentrating on the 1,500 and 5,000, but I didn't really have the speed to be a real top athlete at all those distances. And, so then I stuck to the marathon, then got invited to Japan and went there. I was hoping I'd get, put in a good performance and break 2 hours 22. Well, lo and behold, I did more than break 2:22. I broke 2:10. So it happened all very quickly, and I was kind of very surprised that the way it happened, actually. So,
what was life like? Because if you were running sub 2:10 now, 50 years later, you would be probably at the moment still Australia's best marathon runner, and you would be a full-time athlete, and you would be on a salary, probably from sponsors and from the government, probably on a scholarship, and you'd probably be earning quite a good living. Back then, could you make enough to get by on running?
I wasn't making anything. I don't think anybody was. Some of the track athletes were going off to Europe, they were paying money, but marathon, no, definitely not. I had trouble getting my airfare. I mean, it was that, it was just, as a matter of fact, I remember quite distinctly, I ran a race in Turkey, which I won, and then 10 days later I ran a new world record on the marathon in Belgium, and because it was rumoured that I'd collected some money, which I had collected money, by the way, to put towards my airfares, which I had to pay, and that was found out by the authorities in Australia, and I was banned forthwith until a satisfactory explanation was put forward. Oh. So I was in England ready to have a big race there, and all I did was making phone calls back and forth, trying to play how innocent I was, and that the money I did receive was in fact only money I put in towards my airfare. I wasn't making any money. So it was strictly amateur back in those days, very, very strictly amateur.
So what was the week like? Because you were working a job as well as
I was. I was even going to night school at one point. It was pretty tough because I was up at 5 o'clock every morning going for an hour's run, and then I had to be at work at 8:45, and then I didn't stop work until 5 o'clock, and then I had to be at night school at 7 o'clock. So life wasn't easy. It wasn't. But when you've got a passion for something, and I had a determination, to succeed, it was just like I just had to do it, and I didn't think of all these negatives. That, it never entered my mind that I was doing it tough. It was just one of those things that you have to do to be successful.
And just for the listeners, like what sort of I think I was saying to you earlier that I had a diary of your running schedule, and it was breathtaking in terms of how many miles you did and how hard you trained. Can you give a bit of a summary or a bit of an idea as to the miles you were running and how many times you'd train a day?
Well, it's breathtaking to me now when I look back on it, let me tell you. Look, there was very few, how will I put it, there was nothing written back in those days about marathon training. There was no leads I could get. There was no coaches that really knew a great deal about marathon running back then. It was all hit and miss a bit. And so I just thought, well, if I'm going to run a marathon, I've got to do a lot of miles. I've got to make it as easy as possible. It's like if you're going to do a 4-minute mile, you've got to learn how to run 60 seconds for 4 laps. And I just figured if I'm going to be a top marathon runner, I had to learn how to run, say, 5-minute miles consecutively. So I went out and that's what I did. I just went out and ran hard. I couldn't see the sense in running 10, 20 miles easy. I had to run at a pace where I thought I was going to have to race at. Now, I didn't do that all the time, obviously. I would have killed myself. So for a while, I probably needed to do 150 miles a week. Not Ks a week back in those days, obviously, but it was 150 miles a week. Then I put it up to over 200 to see what would happen. And then I trained 3 times a day to see what would happen. So I was experimenting, then figured that the 3 times a day was overdoing it. I wasn't recovering in time. And then the 200 miles a week plus in pretty poor shoes. Now this is a very important point because I used to run in Dunlop Volleys, the old tennis shoes. Back in those early days, there was no real running shoes per se, and I used to run in the very early days of Tiger shoes, which had, there's just no protection there at all. So when I was doing my 200 plus a week, I was running in shoes that weren't really capable to do that sort of mileage. And so it was knocking my body around. So I started having a few injury problems. And during my athletic career, I think I had about 12 operations. So a lot of operations because I knocked myself around pretty badly. So 300 miles a week, I figured was a little bit too much. And then I went back to 100 miles a week. I find that wasn't quite enough. So 100, for me personally, 150 miles a week, running a marathon every Saturday, 8 weeks before a major marathon. I figured that was ideal for me.
Okay, so 150 miles and up to 300. So we're talking in modern parlance, sort of 300 to 450 kilometres a week. So running a marathon a day in wafer thin shoes. So I guess the obvious question is, would Derek Clayton in 2020 in a pair of these super duper Nike shoes, what would Derek Clayton run today?
Well, I've heard 2 or 3 seconds per K thrown around. I've heard up to 5, 7, 8 thrown around, seconds thrown around. Look, it's hard to know, but definitely a lot quicker.
Yeah,
no question about that. I think I'd be looking at least 3 minutes faster, possibly more, because the shoes I wore were pretty awful. I like to think that it could be even 5 minutes faster because there's just no impact.
You were running marathons. You were racing in the Dunlop Volleys as well.
No, I went to the first race. Yeah, I did initially, yes. But when I went to Japan and ran the first world record, I took my Dunlop Volleys with me. But the ASICS Tiger guy was there, and he said, "You wear our shoes." And he had this wafer, had the old Tiger Cubs, one of the first, and it had a soft kangaroo upper, which I thought was fabulous. And I thought, gee, what a great pair of shoes these are. But the sole was wafer thin. And I've still got them at home, actually. It's amazing. I lost them, and even though I probably would have thrown them out, and I'm very glad that I kept them. I've been told now they're worth a lot of money by some of these people that collect memorabilia. I'll never sell them, obviously. But they're so wafer thin. And so I thought, well, these look a lot lighter than the Dunlop Volleys. I'll put them on. So I wore a brand new pair of shoes and ran 2:09:36. The only time I ever wore them, because when I ran that record, Adidas and these shoe companies were all over me to wear their shoes, and that's when technology started to take a few leaps and bounds.
Was Nike around?
Nike was around back in those days. They didn't approach me, no. Don't quite know why. I don't think Nike were around. They weren't as big back then, actually. Adidas and Puma and Tiger were the three biggies. They're the three big companies.
So I guess the question comes up then, because you've painted the picture of someone who experimented and in some ways you're inferring that made a lot of mistakes and got a lot of things wrong. Whereas today people are very carefully micromanaged in the programs and watch the heart rate and do testing and et cetera, yet no one's coming close at the moment. No one in Australia is coming close to the times you ran in 1969. So should they be copying what you did way back then?
Yeah, look, it's hard to say. I just needed a lot of hard work. Because for a marathoner, I'm pretty big. I know I'm skinny, but I'm pretty, as you know, when I was running marathons, everyone around me, the competitors were all small and very lightly built. So I always figured that I had to do a lot more work. Like if Steve Monaghetti, to go back to quote Steve, he's very lightly built compared with me. Well, I think if Steve did the training that I did, he'd be breaking down a lot more than I ever broke down. I don't think he could absorb that. I don't think it's totally necessary that athletes, marathoners do what I did. It just, I figured I had to do that because that was my physiology, as it were. Mm-hmm. Whether I'm right or wrong on that, I don't really know. But, if I had massages, I never had I hardly ever had a massage. Medical science back then when it's in its infancy. So if I got an injury, I remember I had to go from where I lived in Armidale at that time. I had to go across to Essendon because that's where the Essendon doctor used to be, and I'd go there. After training, so that was very inconvenient. So a lot of things have changed.
Yeah. So in this block leading up to Japan, let's take a 6-month lens on it. What did that look like?
Well, a 6-month lens in Japan, I was still training for track, and then I think I ran a what did I do now? I can't remember. I won a race that got me an invitation to Japan, and I wasn't given a tracksuit. I was given a singlet and a pair of shorts. These days I'd be given a lot more than that, and I had to take a manager with me. Now, what a waste of money that was, wasn't it? So off I go with this manager. I didn't know anything about marathon running, and off we go to Japan. And of course, marathon running has always been big in Japan. Very, very big. So when I get there, the press are everywhere, and they didn't know much about me, obviously. But there's, there would have been 10. Well, the race itself, there wouldn't have been more than probably 40 in it. It was kind of special invitations. So we're all good athletes. So it was a very good chance that I would finish last. Very good chance. And so I just went there hoping I could make my best time. I think the best then was 2:18 I'd run, which is a new Australian. I ran one Australian record, 2:23, then ran another one at 2:18. So off I go to Japan, hoping I could break 2:18. And race goes off, starting gun goes off, and the streets are lined with thousands of people, which I found unbelievable. And started in a soccer stadium, and all these, must have been 5,000-6,000 people just in the stadium to watch it start. And so all the adrenaline's pumping. So I get off and off I go. And all the distances were in kilometres. Well, I'm a mileage man, not a kilometre man. And even though I had an idea, I had a fair idea. And then the 5K comes up and it's just over 15 minutes. And then the next K comes up and it's just over 30 minutes. I'm going, Derek, you're crazy. You can't keep this up. And I didn't feel too bad. So I'm in a group of about 20 or 30. And then it's down to 20, then it's down to 12, and then it's down to 15, then it's down to 10. So people are dropping off, and I'm still up there. And next minute, there's only there's 3 of us. And I'm thinking, what am I doing? I shouldn't be doing this. I'm going to burn out. And that was before the turn. And then ended up with at the turn with the Japanese favourite. And so they do the turn, there's 2 of us coming back. And of course, all the Japanese are waving all these Japanese flags, waiting for him to take off. And I was waiting for him to take off as well, to be quite honest. And anyway, I'm running along, and I'll never forget this. I probably shouldn't say this, but going back, this brings back memories, because we come up to a drink station, and they're probably past the halfway mark, so would probably be 25k, close to 30k, and there's a drink station. Well, back then they didn't have all these fancy drink containers. We had these plastic cups full of water, and so I was running. He was on the side where the drink station was, and I was on next to him, but on the opposite side, if you know what I mean. It wasn't convenient for me to get across to get a drink because I would have had to chop my stride, and I was getting tired, to be quite blunt, and so to change stride I didn't want to do it, and so he went and grabbed the cup, and he gave the cup to me.
Oh.
Yeah, which I was surprised about, and so the cup, I'm running along, and all the water's pouring out of the cup, you see, and it was all out of it, so it was almost all gone. So I drank, but there was not much left in it, and next minute I just threw the cup away, and I don't think he understood that the cup was empty. You know, it was kind of an insult, you know. And anyway, he looked at me and he looked a bit astonished. And I thought, well, this is a good opportunity to make a break. So I took off. I never saw him again. And next minute I'm leading this darn race, which I never thought I wouldn't have. I never dreamt of winning this race. So people are everywhere, and I go into the stadium, which is now full of people. Anyway, I crossed the line. I can't believe what's happened. It's like a dream. And then I had an interpreter there, and he comes up and he's waving he's talking in Japanese. Everyone's excited. I didn't understand what anyone was saying. I've got no idea what time I'd run. Not the faintest idea. And all of a sudden this guy comes up with a piece of paper, and it had written on it 2:08. And I said, he's left the one off. It's 2:18. So it took a while. It would have taken 3 or 4 minutes after I'd finished to sink in that I'd run 2:09 and it was a world record. And after that, I was whisked away in a special taxi, special car with these police escort outriders whisking me off to the various TV and radio stations for an interview. It's just an amazing story. I'll never forget it.
Oh.
Yeah.
So you were running this whole race just off
on adrenaline.
And you had a time at each kilometre, or did you have
I did. I knew it was quick, but I couldn't work out that it was going to be that quick. And after a while, after 20 Ks, I knew it was pretty quick. But I never thought of it at the time. It just didn't. It was all surreal.
Yeah.
Honestly, it didn't sink in. I was just carried away with all the crowds of people, and you had this big bus full of with the TV cameras on it, because it's all being televised. I got caught up in the euphoria of it, and I just wasn't. I don't think I was thinking straight. If I'd have been thinking straight, I wouldn't have gone off with the leaders. I would have held back and run at a pace that I thought I could keep for that distance. So it was just it was crazy, but we'll run this best time, and yeah.
And also taken 9 minutes off your PB.
I was. I know people couldn't believe it.
It's a great story as well, because now we often almost governed by watt meters in cycling, or by GPS watches, and everyone goes in thinking I'm going to run 3:22 pace, say, or whatever.
Yeah.
And you don't go within 2 seconds faster. Or
No.
Had you been governed by a watch, you would have gone 10 minutes slower.
We didn't have those watches back
Yeah.
then.
Yeah,
Didn't
exactly.
have. I never ran with a watch in my life. Didn't have them. I mean, it's just changed so much in 50 years. It has changed so much.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing for me is shoes. When you think back to the shoes I wore, it's no wonder about a knee replacement. I've got back issues. The shoes today are just absolutely fabulous. I love to have run in those shoes. I'd love to have seen what I could have done in those shoes.
Yeah. Do you have a view, just quickly, on the controversy at the moment about whether the shoes should be banned in terms of the performance advantage that they offer?
Look, I think all sports have got to be controlled. You've got tennis. They can't play with any tennis ball. They're all controlled. I'm a bit concerned about golf. That's getting out of hand right now, because these guys are hitting the ball so much further, and golf balls are a lot more, they travel further. I think golf's got to be controlled, and I think running will have to be the same way. Next minute you'll be running with springs in them. So I think, yes, I think these new Nike shoes coming out, I think they're going to have to be. I think they're going to have to be restrictions put on them, because where's it all going to end? it's got to end somewhere.
And it seems particularly a shame in running, potentially, because it's almost the purest. You know, there's not too much that you can change. The drafting doesn't really have that big an effect, and it's very pure.
It is pure, and except for the shoes.
Yeah,
and I disagree what's happened. I mean, I was a bit upset. I mean, the 2-hour marathon, I was hoping that would be done under racing conditions.
Yes.
I think this now takes away a lot from the guy that does break 2 hours. The fact that it's been set up like this, run in a foreign country, had a V formation of other athletes, had a laser line across it. We had to keep it to this laser line to break 2 hours. Had these special shoes which only last for a marathon, then they're fairly useless after that. Yeah, look, I've got a bit of a problem with it. I have a problem with it. And I can't blame the athlete that did it. Was a great athlete. He's a tremendous athlete, and he was probably paid $1 million for it. So I can't blame him for doing it. I just blame the way that it was all set up like that.
A bit different to Fukuoka in 1969, it seems.
A lot different. And the other change which I'm having a problem with is all races these days, whether it be marathon running, road running, or track running, all pacemakers.
Yeah.
Pacemakers all over the place. And I'm absolutely against pacemaking. I like to race. And you don't race now, you just hang on to the pacemakers.
Yeah.
And that's not racing to me. And that's why a lot of the Aussie athletes, they go over there and do all the qualifying times because they've been dragged through to these qualifying times. And yet when they go to the World Championships on the Olympic Games, where there's no pacing, they're a bit lost because they have to race.
Yeah.
So I'm having a hard time coming to grips with that. Maybe I'm a little bit too old-fashioned.
Do you think that plays, though, into your training? It was all about racing. You weren't training to a watch, because that is throughout an athlete's life now, is data, tech,
It is, yeah.
monitoring the scheduling and the specificity of it, whereas you were taking the complete opposite approach.
Yeah.
But that inner motive, that inner drive that an athlete gains from having that carrot at the end of the line, that winning mentality.
Yeah, in some ways it could have been negative. I know a lot of people would say that I overdid it. I trained too hard. That's well known out there. And look, that could be a possibility. I think I probably did overdo it. And I think there's a high possibility that I didn't need to train as hard as what I did. And maybe I could have run faster if I hadn't have trained as hard as what I did. There's always that way of looking at it. I did get tired. And I had a few injury problems, and quite often I ran with minor injuries, shall I say? I think the way it's going is better. I was in no man's land. I didn't even know what I was doing half the time. I was just pushing, and I had this time frame because I didn't really enjoy doing what I did. This might sound kind of funny. I mean, how could you enjoy going out and running 200 miles a week? You'd have to be a bit mental to enjoy doing that. And quite frankly, I didn't enjoy it. It was a means to... I didn't enjoy studying either, but it was a means of an end. You got to do it. I felt I had to do it. And because I disliked it to a large degree, it made me more of a determined competitor because I wanted to win. Otherwise, what's the point of doing all this damn hard work if you're not going to have some success? So there's a lot of that in it as well.
André, might just touch on the cardiology. So Derek mentioned before he wanted to be a 1,500 metre runner. Why didn't that work? But the marathon was so successful.
Well, it's interesting. We can chat a bit about what sort of role sports science has had in your career, Derek. But part of the reason Derek's here is that we did some testing today, and the results that we see seem to be similar to those that were described by Dave Costel in the past. And often your physiology is put up as a textbook example of someone who had a oxygen capacity, a VO2 max, which was very high, but not the highest, not super elite, but that you could run the marathon very close to your maximum. Whereas some of the other examples like Alberto Salazar, who had a considerably higher VO2 max, but could only run at sort of 75% of that. So the actual, during the marathon, it was very similar. And it was interesting today because during your VO2 max test, your maximum was very close to your anaerobic threshold or your ventilatory threshold. And coming back to your question, Alex, that picture that we see is the pure sort of diesel engine of humans, the ability to go all day at a high level, but not having that sort of extra super quick gear that you need as a 1500 metre or 5000. Yeah. So if we were to look at just your VO2 max and I was to be asked what sort of athlete is attached to that, I would have said a superb endurance athlete rather than a middle distance and similarly in with your cycling, I suspect that you are more the sort of domestique or time trialist rather than the person who had that extra gear to just really sprint off the front or to change the pace dramatically. And it's interesting that we see that physiology through testing.
Yeah. That'd be right. That's why I didn't make it as a 1500 metre runner. I just didn't have that basic speed. I could go quite quickly, all right, but I just couldn't go to that next level. Yeah, and the sim and when I'm riding a bike now, I used to race bikes for 5 or 6 years, and I could climb very well. I was always a pretty good climber, and I could go at a pretty fast rate for a long period of time. But the guys used to, in bike racing, it's shocking. All they do is sit on you. Sit, because they're doing 30% less work than me at the front. And of course, there's about 400 metres to go, bang, they're gone.
Yeah. And the opposite is also true a bit, is that if you have that extra capacity to be more of a middle distance, then that almost becomes a disadvantage in endurance, because if you dip into that area where you're building up lactic acid and things, it really impairs your performance over the long run. So it was the perfect sort of setup. Did you have much testing through your career or guidance?
No, not really. No, very little. I think it was a couple of times we were tested. I was tested before one of the Olympic Games. I was tested for that. I think other long distance runners in the team were as well. And then David Costell, as you mentioned, back in Munsey's University in the States, he did a couple of tests on me going back 40, 50 years ago. Yeah. So that's data now. We're now trying to compare against. That'll be interesting.
And I suppose that now the question comes up, and we were talking about this earlier about whether you can do too much exercise. There's a lot of controversy in the heart specialty field as to whether people can do so much exercise that actually causes heart problems. To me, and looking at your testing today and hearing about everything that's gone on, and you haven't had any heart problems, running 200, 300 miles a week, a lot of it very hard, you couldn't get someone who's pushed the boundaries more. To me, you would be the perfect proof that you can exercise really hard and be extremely healthy at the age of 77.
Yeah, look, you're right. So far, so good. But I push it still. I'm starting to even question at 77, should I be pushing it as hard as what I am? Look, I enjoy doing it. I feel that I'm not hurting myself. I'm not overdoing it. I could be, but I don't feel that I am. And so I'll just keep pushing it, because I enjoy pushing it. I mean, I'm not a person who goes out and rides a bike slowly. That bores me. I want to have a go at it. I mean, I don't go flat stick from the very word go, but I like to be a bit competitive. And there's a group of guys that I ride with. We come back fairly solidly, and we do rollovers, and I like to make sure I participate in that. And so when I finish the ride, I feel as if it's been a pretty hard workout. Now, whether I'm doing myself any harm or not, only the future will tell. But I just don't think that I am. And as you say, I'm enjoying good health, and whether that's because I've been dealt a good deck of cards at birth, I don't really know. But I intend to keep doing what I'm doing because I enjoy it.
Do we want to talk about Antwerp now? Maybe move on. do you want to go a bit more into
sporting
research?
Yeah, maybe there's one thing also that I'd like to. Can we just continue on from here? Because the other thing that I'd like to hear a little bit about was the 1968 Olympics in Mexico City, because that was before my time. But a number of extraordinary things happened there, both because of the altitude. And
really, no, that was Munich.
And then a lot of political things, and it was also the Peter Norman with the Black Power.
Yeah.
If we start with your part of everything, which was the marathon, and I think you came 7th in 2:27. That must have been an extraordinary marathon, because 2:27, in big inverted commas, is slow by the times that you've been talking about. So altitude must have played a massive role. Was there sports science or anything specific that did you train at altitude for that? Were you aware of how different it would be?
I was aware because of quite a bit of publicity about it, especially when Mexico got nominated the Olympics, and I knew there was going to be a problem. I didn't do any altitude training at all, and the reason being is I wanted the comfort of my own home. I didn't want to be in a what I would call a foreign environment. I wanted the food that I enjoy eating, and so the idea of going up to Falls Creek or going anywhere else for altitude, that didn't appeal to me. What I would have liked to have done, and in hindsight, I think it would have been a big difference, is stayed in Melbourne up until the very last minute and gone to Mexico 2 or 3 days before my event. That's what I'd like to have done. But no, I had to go there. I was there 6 weeks in an environment that wasn't conducive to running a good race, because you're rooming with 5 or 6 other guys. And all the guys were good guys, by the way, and we didn't have air conditioning. The windows were wide open. And what happens is at the Olympics, because the marathon is the last event, other people are finishing their events. So it's party time. So those who have finished are going out having a good time, as well they should. But there's me trying to concentrate on my event, which is the last event, and I've been there for 6 weeks. It wasn't a good preparation. And what happened was that I found that I was running better when I first got to Mexico. And the longer I stayed there, the more tired I became. I started to feel lethargic, and that wasn't like me. And I found out when I went for a run and the pressure would go on, I get tired and my legs would go to jelly or become like lead very, very quickly. So coming up to the marathon, I can't say I was overly confident. But the fact that it was won by an Ethiopian in 2:18, I think it was, proves just the effects of the altitude. Everyone was affected by the altitude, and it just unfortunate. And it was warm as well, and both my marathons in the Olympics, both in Mexico and Munich, were started around about 1 o'clock in the afternoon,
right?
Which is a no-no.
Yeah.
I'll never do that now. Now it would be 6 o'clock in the morning.
Yep.
A lot more sensible time.
And it was also when the famous incident when Ron Clark sort of collapsed at the end of the 10,000, and his doctor subsequently said that he thought he might die.
Yeah.
Did that sort of come across in the athlete village? Were people getting scared of the altitude?
No, that didn't come across.
Yeah.
I think that might have been a bit of an exaggeration. I read that myself, but not at the time. I was there. I trained a lot with Ron, and I was very close mates with Ron. And I saw him after the race. I never thought for 1 second he was going to die. There obviously was a problem with him running at altitude at that pace, just like there was, for a lot of us. I just thought that Mexico was a bad place to have the Olympics for endurance athletes. Pure bad luck.
And can I ask, because it is one of my favourite sporting stories, about the Peter Norman incident and Tommy Smith and Johnny Carlos and the sort of Black Power salute.
Yeah.
Perhaps maybe for listeners, I mean, people probably should be aware, but this was a time when race equality was being being pushed, and Athletes for Human Rights was a badge that people were wearing, and Johnny Carlos and Tommy Smith made a statement by raising black gloves in sort of a symbol of or a statement of athletic equality. And Peter Norman was asked whether he was happy to be sort of part of it, or else they wouldn't do it, and he said, "I stand with you." A really kind of beautiful Australian story, but also an incredible athletic achievement, because I think his time in the 200 metres is close to, or is still the fastest ever run by an Australian over 200 metres.
Yeah, he was a great athlete, Peter, and he's no longer with us, sadly. And but it was interesting at the time. I was there and I saw it, because I was in the team, obviously, and I saw what was happening. But when it all happened, it was kind of, yes, it's not bad to do that. I went along with it, but no big deal. But then again, the longer afterwards, it just sort of gathered its own energy.
Yeah.
And I think Peter Norman became better known because of that than his athletic achievements, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So and they came out. Both Smith and Carlos came out for his funeral, which I also went to. So it's just one of those things that sort of got its own energy. It's funny how things, same as Ron Clark when he fell and John Landy picked him up. Well, that sort of got its own energy, and it's it's kind of interesting. But at the time, all of us watching it, we never thought much of it. We thought, oh, sort of good on those guys to be able to protest. Whether you agree with it or not, I don't know. But it certainly didn't seem that big a deal at the time. But a week later, it became bigger and bigger and bigger every day that went by.
Yeah.
From a cardiology perspective, that altitude, the time, the things, the symptoms that Derek was describing, what's happening there?
Well, it's definitely more difficult at altitude. Interestingly, for endurance athletes, much more difficult, whereas one of the arguments with Peter Norman's time is that for sprinters, it's actually an advantage because the air's thinner and there's less resistance. And when you're a sprinter, oxygen consumption and things is not important at all to performance. Whereas in endurance events, the amount of oxygen that you can get to your muscles determines performance to a large extent. And at altitude, there's just less oxygen in the air, and so it takes a lot more work from the cardiovascular system to get that oxygen to the muscles. So consistently, people's times are slower at altitude. It's also the theory behind altitude training is that if you train at altitude, you can get an improvement in, it's like stressing another system.
Yeah.
So your body gets better at stealing that oxygen from the blood and using it. And then if you go back down to sea level, you can use oxygen better. It seems to work very well for some people and less for others, but it's not at all. It would be expected that the times at Mexico City would be a lot slower than at sea level. And it also would have been very difficult in that 6 weeks to train because it's another stress for the body training at altitude.
It's a bit demoralising actually. And then of course you're living in an environment which is not that particularly enjoyable because things were breaking in Mexico. The village at Mexico was a bit second rate.
Yeah.
The toilet wouldn't flush and this wouldn't work and this wouldn't work, and after a while I'm just getting I was ready for going home, let me tell you. Yeah. And that's why when I'm preparing for a race, I prepare to do it at my own home.
Yep.
Or if I go somewhere overseas, I like a nice hotel. I don't want to be living in a 2-star, 3-star hotel.
Yeah.
Because you want to be completely relaxed and be able to get the food that you want and get the sleep that you need, all those sort of things. So, but Mexico certainly wasn't. Mexico and Munich didn't give me the facilities what I would have preferred.
And speaking of John Landy, because I've given you a little publication there, a list of athletes, two of the famous people in sports cardiology, Paul Thompson and Barry Marin, put together a list of the first 20 people to run under 4 minutes for the mile. So Roger Bannister's at the top and John Landy, and a whole lot of names down that list that you would probably recognise.
Yeah.
And the point of that article is that on average, that every one of those first 20 people, on average, lived 12 years longer than would be expected, suggesting that endurance exercise makes people healthier and live longer.
Well, you would expect that, wouldn't you? You would expect that. I mean, I don't know, I might be a bit different, but I feel very healthy. I'm very fortunate at 77, and going in these figures, that means, I can look forward to a long, healthy life. There's a few more years left in me yet then.
Yeah. But,
hopefully, André.
I think you're right that we would expect that. I mean, it's, exercise makes the muscle stronger, the heart stronger, reduce heart attacks and reduce the risk of stroke. But as we were sort of discussing before, there's been almost a kickback, particularly in the lay press, and some articles coming out. There was one famous one in the New York Times that said "one running shoe in the grave," and alluding to the fact that maybe you can do sort of too much exercise. But that's one article, whereas there's really a whole lot of articles that quite clearly show that athletes live longer. And I think that's something that's really important to sort of come across, because it's not always accurately presented in the media.
That's a very good point. And who was it, the famous South African surgeon who did the first transplant, Bernard?
Yeah.
He said in his book, which I read years and years ago, he says there's only so many heartbeats in a heart. And if you go and do a lot of exercise, you're
running out of heartbeats.
You're running out of heartbeats.
I actually think that there's something really in that. But what he forgot in that book is that when you're exercising, say you exercise for an hour a day, then your heart rate might be 160 or 170. But for the other 23 hours, your heart rate's a lot lower than the person who doesn't exercise. So over the 24 hours, you actually save heartbeats.
Yeah,
and so I think there's something really in his whole idea that you've only got so many heartbeats, but athletes use less of them.
Yeah, that's one
paradoxically.
Good way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
Do we want to touch on this study too?
Perhaps, because the one of the other things that we did today was reenact this photograph from the research that you did in 1970 and then 1991. And one of the things that they showed in this obviously in the study, they have a group of athletes, but my understanding is that your VO2 max hardly changed from that of a 25-year-old to a 45-year-old, which again is against what we would expect with science, because in general people lose about 1% of their fitness from mid-20s. So you're a bit of a sort of miracle on a number of levels, or a bit of a outlier.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? That is interesting. It would have changed between then and now, though, wouldn't it? Changed dramatically.
It has, in that your VO2 max that we measured today was a fair bit less than it was, as a 20 and as a 40-year-old. But relative to what would be expected for a 77-year-old, your VO2 max was twice that of what would be expected. Whereas back then it wouldn't have been twice what was expected. So
it'd be interesting to compare a fit athlete at 77-year-old, because you're comparing me now with Mr. Average, which was probably not totally correct.
Yeah. Although Mark Hargraves, a professor from Melbourne Uni, was pulling up a study earlier that did compare you to elite octogenarians, and you were outperforming all of those as well.
He did. He showed me. That's right. He did tell me that. That's interesting.
So whatever metric we pull up, you're still a winner.
Well, we'll see what happens with my longevity. No doubt that'll be noted when my time comes. Yeah.
I'm interested. So you've run this time in Japan. You've had a not so ideal Mexico City, and then where were you at after Mexico City? Well, mentally, what was the goals then?
Well, I was peed off because I wanted to win a gold medal, and I knew at Mexico City it was going to be very difficult. So I was aggravated. I was annoyed. Yeah.
So that initial drive was even higher.
Yeah. Well, in some ways, because I looked at Munich, and I wasn't that optimistic at Munich because I knew it was going to be hot. There was a very good chance. Apparently, the weather in Munich's very like Melbourne. You can cop a real bad hot day. And of course, running the marathon at 1 o'clock in the afternoon was always ridiculous. Totally ridiculous. And me being big, I've got a high sweat rate. I knew I was possibly going to be in trouble there as well. And that's why I retired after maybe because the next one after that was Montreal. And I did a thing for Channel 7. Again, it was 1 o'clock in the afternoon. We went and I fried an egg. I was doing a series on TV. I went and fried an egg at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on the actual marathon course. I fried an egg on the road. That's how hot, how warm it was. So it's a kind of bit crazy, you know. Yeah. So was I down? Yes. But then again, I thought, well, let's run another world record. And that's when Antwerp came up. I thought, so I trained for that. That was with the one in Fukuoka. That was accidental. I just wanted, as I mentioned, only wanted to go in there and run well. But I thought, damn it, I can run a lot faster than this, a lot faster. So Antwerp came up. There wasn't too many marathon opportunities back in those days. But this one came up in Antwerp. It was going to be run in the evening. I thought, that appeals to me. It's going to be cool. And so off I go to Antwerp. So I had it all worked out, the Ks, everything. Completely different. It was all worked out exactly how fast I was going to run. And which I did. I was on time. I didn't care about anybody else. I went off. I didn't go off on my own. There was probably maybe 10 or 12 of us, but I wasn't interested in what anyone else was doing. I just was focused, really focused. And so, yeah, I ran the world record, stuck to my schedule, and ran a world record. And when I'd finished that, I thought I can run a lot faster than this again. I thought I could run, that ran 2:08. I thought I could run 2:05, 2:06. And best because I'd already run a marathon in Turkey 10 days before. That left me a little bit tired because that was at altitude. And to win it, I had to beat these two pretty good athletes who were obviously trying to beat me. And to win the thing, I had to run a lot faster. I think it was 2:17, which is not a bad time at, I think it was 5,000 altitude, 5,000 feet. And I finished a bit buggered after that. And I thought, God, I've got this world record attempt coming up in 10 days. Oh, I think I might have erred. But I did it because I wanted to make some money to pay for my travel expenses. Because back in those days, it's unlike today, of course. Yeah, so that's why I ran it. In hindsight, I shouldn't have done it, but I did it. And still run a world record, but I often think that I could have run a little bit faster if I hadn't have had that hard marathon 10 days previous.
And in that lead-up phase, we're still working.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I always worked through my whole career, yeah. I'd give away studying. I thought I'd give away the going to night school. I think it was all too much, so I gave that away. Yeah, I gave that away. I just couldn't keep doing what I was doing. I was going to end up running myself into a stupor.
And then when did retirement come about?
I came about. I ran in the Commonwealth Games in New Zealand, and I got injured. I was getting a lot of injuries, and I got injured again. I went off to Commonwealth Games and did the finish. And I thought that enough's enough. I'm leaving. And then with Montreal coming up, being in a hot country at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I thought I'm not going to continue doing this. I'm not going to continue doing it. I just got fed up. And I had no regrets. A lot of athletes can't retire. When they do retire, they've got a real problem with it. I didn't enjoy all the hard training. I didn't enjoy that. And I was getting fed up, getting injured, and running to the doctors. My life seemed to be consumed by marathon running. And I just, quite frankly, said, oh, no, I'm going to call quits on this. And just stopped. Never looked back.
Derek's cardiology over this journey. Have you got any insight on how that developed over this long, solid career?
Yeah, so it's interesting because we haven't really touched on it, but since you retired, you stopped marathon running, but you didn't stop exercising, and you got into bike racing, and so there's 60 years plus or minus of pretty heavy training, lifelong exercise. And as we were doing some of the testing there, I was explaining that things like your electrocardiogram, your electrical signal, your resting heart rate is 35 or thereabouts. And that is a bit of a reflection on a lifelong of training, because the heart rate slows down the fitter you are, but also we seeing in our studies that particularly people who have done lifelong exercise, that the heart rate tends to be really, quite low. And similarly, your heart's still big, and one of the differences that we see versus than if you were 18 years of age is that if you stop training, your heart will remain quite big. A lot of the flexibility, if you like, if that's the right term, of the heart tends to go away with the years. That's not a bad thing. I mean, a lot of those changes are the things that still make you very fit at the age of 77. But they're intriguing things to see. There's not too many people around that we can study that have done that sort of volume of exercise over a lifetime. And in some ways, a lot of the testing that we do fit exactly with what we would expect.
Yeah, it was nice to get those results, and nice to know that I'm not damaging myself doing what I'm doing. Yeah, it's a bit heartening, and to know also that I'm not suffering from heart disease or I'm not about to die of a heart attack. Yeah. It's all very interesting stuff. All very, very interesting.
Any last questions, André?
Not really. Just a huge thank you. We've got a little bit more testing to do tomorrow as part of the research, but thank you for being involved, but also a huge thank you for sharing your story. It's just absolutely intriguing, and I think really quite, if nothing else, the work ethic is just really will be an inspiration for a lot of people listening to this podcast, athletes, non-athletes, amateurs, professionals alike. It's really very inspiring. Thank you. Yeah, well, it's been a pleasure to hear and have this little chat, and thank you for having me as a guinea pig. It'll be interesting to know the outcome and the final results. I'll look forward to it. Brilliant. Thank you. I've enjoyed it.
What will, just one more thing, what will be the outcome of Derek's testing? Where will it fit? What will you use it for? So what we're trying to, the bigger point of the study is that although the overall health of athletes, and particularly endurance athletes, is excellent, the one little sting in the tail that's coming through is that long-term athletic training does seem to be associated with an increase in some heart rhythm problems. And so we're studying a lot of endurance athletes that have been really, the top of Australian sport decades ago, and then looking at the heart rhythm and everything that goes with it, their fitness and their heart function. And we are seeing this increase in things like atrial fibrillation, much higher than we would see in a non-athletic population. But it's really important, and so the research is very much to understand that, because through studying athletes we get to help athletes, but also in studying athletes we start to understand these heart rhythm problems in the general community. It's a really nice little insight. You said before, being a guinea pig, in some ways athletes are the animal model for people who do human research, because it is such an extreme stimulus, if you like, sort of training really hard, 300-400 kilometres a week is an extreme intervention on the heart, and so we get to see the effects of that and get to understand things better. The point, though, that I think is really key is that even though we see this signal in increased heart rhythms, and something that I think we can understand better and treat better, but the whole package is that athletes live very healthy and long lives, and I think it's really important that people don't split it up into its parts and focus on the concern, when really it's a small part of the bigger equation, which is really incredible health.
Yeah, it's interesting though that when you think of former athletes, there's an athlete, Kerry O'Brien's his name, he's a world record holder in the steeplechase, same age as me. We were pretty friendly, good mates. He lived in Melbourne for a number of years. We trained together. He's grossly overweight. Don't put this on. Overweight. Now, that's not uncommon with a lot of athletes. When I get together with a few we have in reunions and things, I'm aghast that some of them have put on an awful lot of weight. So they're not doing much in the way of exercise.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's possibly a good thing for the heart either. When your heart's been at a very high level and all of a sudden you stop doing any form of exercise, then you're carrying a lot more weight, which puts a strain on the heart. You know, people who want to put these figures forward about endurance exercise being bad for the heart, they can use those people as part of their studies in a sense, when it's not fair because they've been retired, they've put on all this weight. Like you look at AFL footballers, when you see some of them today, they're awful. Some of them are just, they've been pretty fit and pretty skinny, and then they're carrying all this weight.
Yeah. So in the study, it's really interesting because we have almost equal amount of people like yourself that have stayed lifelong athletes, and then people who have retired and virtually not picked up a running shoe in anger. So we can compare those two groups.
Yeah.
The other thing that we forget, though, is in medicine we always think about things like how long do people live and all. But the thing that motivates people is how they feel today and tomorrow. And one of the things is that if you'll leave here and go walking down the street and play a game of golf and walk upstairs, and everything you do, you will be unlimited. Whereas other people who have not done exercise all their life, they'll be short of breath, and they'll be, having to get the buggy round the golf course and all of these things. And we often forget quality of life. And really, in some ways we can forget all the statistics and just put it down to as simply as I often say use it or lose it. But if you stay active, you feel better. There's no doubt about that. And that's the motivation.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
And the trouble is, people get to my age and 80, they start to feel their age. Because they feel, well, look, I'm 80 years of age, I shouldn't be feeling great because I'm old.
Yeah.
See, my mother lived 101, never had a birthday, and never wanted to discuss 92, 93. And I said, why can't we have a birthday for you, Mum? And she said, once you start thinking when you're 93, 94, once you start thinking you're 93, you're going to start feeling your age. I'm never going to do that. The only birthday she ever had was for her 100th. We had a party for her. And she did enjoy that. But it's interesting, mental thing. Yeah. She had never accepted the fact that she was growing old and why that should affect her lifestyle.
So it's a good way to finish, isn't it? That analogy about life and not ever thinking about your age, and you running the Fukuoka Marathon, never once thinking about the time and then doing a miraculous time.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Move forward, be confident.
Thanks very much, Gerche.
Thank you very much.
Very interesting.